Veronica's there to talk about the proposals of the wind, onshore wind. Let's go to line number 1. Veronica, you're on the air.
Hi, Patty. How's it going?
Doing okay, thank you. How about you?
I'm good, but honestly, I'm also not too good. For the past several months now, I've just been feeling a lot of anxiety and sadness and powerlessness about what our government and some corporations are planning for rural Newfoundland in terms of the wind farms, the industrial wind farms that are planned for parts of central and western Newfoundland. I'm here to talk about the worth of wild places and how these big energy projects actually go against their mandate to reduce greenhouse gases and reduce pollution and destroy nature and wild places instead, and actually are harmful to our environment and our planet. I also want to just speak to the fact that one of the arguments that our government has made for these projects is that they want to attract young Newfoundlanders back to the province with jobs, working either in the construction of these wind farms or in the plants, the ammonia plants that will be constructed. And I want to say I speak here as a young Newfoundlander. I'm in my 20s. I live in rural Newfoundland, and I believe the opposite. I came back to Newfoundland because of its wilderness and pristine, untrodden natural areas that are honestly fast disappearing from not only our province, but our country and our entire world. And Newfoundland has one of the last few remaining wild places where wilderness is at our back door. We've got wildlife, we've got clean water, we've got vast expanses of natural area that are still unblemished by industry or roads or human habitation, and that's a really special thing. And I think we are throwing that all away.
The country's on a path to preserve 30% of its land and waterways, which is obviously a very wise thing to do. When we talk about energy, there is no form of energy that is been understood or developed that doesn't come with environmental cost. So when people are trying to come up with ways to look for alternatives as opposed to the world's reliance on oil that's currently in place, so whether it be with wind or solar, people will have to, I guess, pick and choose what they think is the best form or source of energy, because if we're just going to continue pumping oil, that comes with a distinct cost of the ecosystem. If we're talking about, persistent mining like is currently in place, that comes with the cost of the ecosystem. Wind farms will come with the cost. Solar will come with the cost. So how do we evaluate our need to supply the energy that we currently need in this province, this country, and around the world?
I agree with that totally. And I think that there's a place and a scale for these types of renewable energy projects. They should really be built at the local scale and built to serve the communities that they are built within. So we could have small-scale wind farms. We could have small-scale solar farms where the energy that's produced is going directly back into the community, where people can reduce their reliance on fossil fuels. Or they can also be built on a slightly larger scale in places that have already been developed, like old industrial areas, places near cities where, wild places aren't as prominent. And we really should strive to keep wild what is still wild, because those places are fast disappearing and they have an inherent value that I think most people forget about and dismiss very easily. And another thing that we should also consider is the need to really reduce all our economies and honestly our standard of living, because we cannot go on living the way that we've been for the past century or 2 centuries, just consuming and always wanting more progress, more growth, more money, power. We really need to scale everything down to a much more localized level, focus on, permaculture, localized economies where people live more off the land and reduce, carbon footprints that come with, shipping things across oceans or, driving or flying hundreds or thousands of kilometers to distribute their goods and services. We really need to think more on a local scale and reduce our consumption if we want to think seriously about reducing our environmental impact on this planet.
Reducing consumption is, I think, a worthwhile conversation. The question becomes, whether or not small scale is actually a better idea than large scale, whether it be with price point for the end consumer, because we have to factor in things like how much it costs to energize our world. So small scale, also when you mentioned about putting these wind farms somewhere that's already been developed, the key in trying to find efficiency in wind is to put them where the wind blows. And not everywhere has the same wind speed and or the reliance on firm wind that other areas do. For instance, if you're talking about on the Port-au-Port Peninsula versus maybe some of the inland in central Newfoundland, there's been measurements done at these towers about the the reliability of wind. So should we not also be very, very careful not to spin our wheels and do what's optically more acceptable versus what is actually optimizing every opportunity to create power at the lowest price point, all the while understanding that every source of energy comes with environmental costs. There's no such thing as a purely green source of energy.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that, but also I'm thinking about not just in terms of the energy that's going to be produced in, say, windier places versus less windy places. And I'm sure we can find windy places that have already been, say, industrialized or more industrialized where, places aren't as remote and rugged and wild. But I also want to think about, the local economy and the livelihoods of the people that live in these areas, because these areas are going to be forever changed by these projects. The ways of life of the people who rely on the land for hunting or fishing, their clean water, ecotourism, outfitting, all of these things are going to be forever eradicated and changed by the introduction of these projects. And we can't be saying that, this is what the people want and they just want jobs, because that's not the reality. People are coming back to Newfoundland for what it has, and what it has is natural beauty and wilderness that is really almost unparalleled in most other places in the world. So the fact that we're just throwing that aside and focusing just on our energy needs in the present day, in the present moment, and forgetting about future generations and what they will need, I think is irresponsible. And I just want to focus on what we're going to be losing if we go ahead with these projects, and the fact that it can never be regained.
And not to be crass or saucy, because I understand the environmental concern, I really truly do. And we talk about WERAC and protected areas and marine protected zones and stuff like that frequently on this program. What about if someone simply says, the environment as it stands today won't pay the bills. The environment as it stands today will not be able to provide the energy required, whether it be in this province, across the country, or around the world. So how do we find or strike the required balance? Because that's going to be the be-all and end-all here. Because if we just talk status quo, then your concerns regarding the environment and the pristine nature of will forever be damaged. Because the way that we currently generate energy in this world has been less than helpful to the environment, less than respectful to the environment, less than respectful to biodiversity. So I guess the question will be, where is the actual sweet spot? Because I don't have the answer to that. That's what I'm proposing and provoking further conversation, because at some point we are going to have to determine exactly where that sweet spot lies, exactly where that balance can be struck, because the current process now obviously has not found it. Are these wind energy and hydrogen and natural gas and other forms of energy, are they better alternatives? I'll leave that up to people who understand the science a bit more than I do, but that will be the ultimate goal, to find the balance, to strike the appropriate balance, to find that sweet spot, so to speak.
Right. And I think that just comes back to my point in saying that we drastically need to change the entire way that our system and our world economy works and the way that we consume products. We really need to completely reinvent our standards of living, the way that we just consume fossil fuels, whether it be by driving or flying everywhere, or just by purchasing things brand new from the store every single day, when we could be using a lot less, reusing much more, and localizing our economies. Our focus now in the world is trying to globalize everything, and I think that's the wrong solution. Everything needs to be hyper-localized in order to really create grassroots communities that rely more on the earth and less on imported energy. And I think it's also worth noting that the energy that these windmills, these mega industrial wind farms would provide would be used to produce ammonia, which would then be shipped overseas to Europe to be used most likely in monoculture agricultural practices over there, which is really, it defeats the purpose of having wind farms at all, because we're just perpetuating this cycle of destructiveness in terms of monoculture agriculture and shipping across large distances.
The ammonia would be likely used for fertilizer, which is kind of where you're going with, growing close by. The whole 100-mile or 100-kilometer issue or rule regarding where you get things you eat. And that's the likely use for ammonia. And you talk about localized economy. It's an important part of the conversation here, because at this moment in time, some of the areas that have been proposed, whether it be Exploits Valley or down the Burin Peninsula or on the Port-au-Port Peninsula, we're talking about economies that have been battered and have no real economy of scale. And job opportunities have been fleeting at best. Consequently, what we see is an aging demographic where younger families are leaving, and consequently, localized economies will be mythological. At some point, there'll be no such thing, because there is no economy. There are no jobs. So it's not to say a job is more important than protecting the environment necessarily, but people do need, if we're going to talk about the ability to populate different parts of the province, there's going to have to be something attached to jobs. So whether it be inside the fishery, if we can manage that better than we have in the past, but there's going to have to be some different way to approach actual economic activity. And I'm not saying that we simply have to destroy everything to produce economic activity, but there will be no one left to enjoy the pristine nature of anything unless people actually have a job.
Agreed. And I think we certainly could manage our fisheries a lot better than we do. And there's also a big issue in our province with regards to food insecurity. And I think we could do a lot more by enticing young families or rural Newfoundlanders to, get into homesteading and permaculture and create those small-scale food networks that could be a way to help boost the local economy. And I would also argue that, these industrial jobs that are promised with the creation of these wind farms, we say, come back home, you'll have a job. Come back to rural Newfoundland. But what is the point of coming back to your home if your home no longer really exists, if it's been destroyed, forever altered by these destructive projects? So that's kind of the message that I want to put forward here is, for me personally, hearing about all of these plans and the vision of our leaders that are not aligned with mine, I want to flee Newfoundland. I want to leave this place now, because I'm afraid that everything that I love and cherish here is going to be destroyed. And that's not the reason that I came back here. I came back for that. And I think a lot of young Newfoundlanders agree with me and actually came back for that same reason.
How many young Newfoundlanders do you think will lose if and when there isn't an opportunity for them to provide for their family or themselves? That's where I think that complication of striking the required balance becomes extremely tricky. I'm glad it's not my job or my mandate in this world.
Yeah.
But, you can't have one without the other. You can't have a vibrant, sustainable, viable region and or province if people are unable to work. It just becomes completely unsustainable. I know we're talking about sustainability regarding the environment and small scale and localized economies, but for our collective sustainability, we are going to have to ensure that people have an opportunity to work. I mean, it's just going to be, regardless of people's environmental stance or political ideology, we all need the same things. We need money. Hopefully that comes with working for a living. We all need to provide for our families in every facet of life. And so that inherently requires economies of scale, job opportunities, because inside the wind farm, it won't be just the taxes generated by people working directly in construction or fully operational jobs after. It would be also the fact that they now have money. And we are the economy. The government is not the economy. So when people create a job, that has I'm not going to say trickle down, because that's been the worst economic theory in the history of man, but it has a multiplier effect. If I have money to spend, I have to spend it somewhere, and consequently, the economy of scale that we desire in Stephenville or surrounding area becomes much more manageable because people actually have jobs. They actually have money. I'll give you the final thoughts, Veronica, because I am late for the break.
Sure. Yeah, no worries. And I agree with what you said, but also I would argue that we need wilderness more than money. I think there's plenty of money and industrial outfits and opportunities everywhere in the world, but we are fast losing our wilderness. And if we do not have these natural places, if we don't have nature on our planet, we don't have anything. We are at a loss as a species, and we need to think further than our own generation and for future generations, not just the next one, but multiple generations into the future, and think about the long-term effects of this. And I think, that's where I'd like to leave it.
I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Patty.
You're welcome, Veronica. Bye-bye.